The year was 1967. Britannia Road in Easton. Bristol was a quiet, unassuming street with rows of terraced houses where the neighbors knew one another by name. Among them lived a young woman named Louisa Dunne. At just 22, Louisa was known for her gentle smile, modest demeanor, and simple sense of style. She wore a light blouse, a soft blue skirt, and always wrapped herself in an old black shawl when the evening chill crept in. People called her a classic English girl, polite, soft-spoken, and quietly independent. She worked as a clerk in a local factory and followed a strict routine, leaving her home at 9 a.m. and returning around 6:30 p.m. every evening. Her neighbors often remarked on how punctual she was, how you could set your watch by Louisa's footsteps. On the night of November 30th, 1967, she had tea with her neighbor, Mrs. Hadley, like she often did. They chatted over biscuits and talked about the upcoming holidays. Louisa mentioned she was looking forward to visiting her sister in Bath in 2 weeks. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She returned home around 8 p.m. Man, that would be the last time anyone saw her alive the following morning. A concerned neighbor noticed Louisa's front door slightly ajar. That was unusual. She was known for being security conscious. Upon entering, they found her lifeless body in the drawing room. Her clothes were torn, her signature blue skirt and blouse were ripped, and her black shawl lay crumpled nearby. The room had an eerie stillness. There were no signs of forced entry except for one clue. A sash window was slightly open, with what appeared to be a palm print on the frame. Near Louisa's body was a discarded cigarette butt, and forensic examiners quickly retrieved what evidence they could. They collected semen samples, hair fibers, and that mysterious print from the window frame. Her handbag was still on the side table, money untouched. Her teacup from the night before remained on the kitchen counter, half full. Nothing was missing, except her life. At the time, DNA testing did not exist. The forensics of the 1960s involved fingerprint matching, blood group typing, and trace analysis. It was slow, limited, and painstaking work. Detective Inspector Gareth Morris led the investigation. He was experienced, pragmatic, and methodical. He ordered a full sweep of the neighborhood. Every man living within a 5-mile radius was fingerprinted over. 20,000 samples, none matched. Every single male employee at her workplace was questioned. The press dubbed it the Easton Invasion, as officers went door to door seeking any clue. One elderly neighbor mentioned hearing a scream that night but assumed it was a cat fight. Another thought she saw a tall man in a dark coat walking briskly away from the alley around 8:30 p.m., but couldn't recall details. There were no reliable witnesses. The cigarette butt had a faint trace of lipstick, suggesting the suspect may have shared it with a woman earlier, or had kissed someone before smoking it. Theories flew. Was it a random assault? A crime of passion? Or someone Louisa knew too well? Inside Louisa's home, investigators found the atmosphere oddly calm. Her room was untouched. There were no signs of struggle or disarray, no broken furniture, no theft. It was methodical, almost too clean. Maurice believed it was someone who knew her schedule, knew how to enter quietly, and left without disturbing much. Among Louisa's personal belongings, detectives found a small black and white photograph tucked inside a drawer. She stood at a railway platform, smiling faintly. Beside her was a man, face blurry, possibly due to camera shake or intentional scratching. Number 1 in her family recognized him. The photo became the only visual-led one that led nowhere. Further digging into Louisa's life revealed she had once been engaged. Her fiancé, Peter Holloway, had broken things off in 1966 due to what he described as growing apart. He was questioned, of course, but had an airtight alibi. He was in Scotland on business, confirmed by hotel records. Another name surfaced. A former co-worker named Dennis Cleves would reportedly shown interest in Louisa. Some colleagues recalled her mentioning he made her uncomfortable, but she never filed a complaint. Dennis, when questioned, denied everything. Again, no forensic link, no confession, no arrest. By early 1968, the case was cold. No charges, no suspect. Just a grieving mother, Mrs. Agnes Dunne, who stopped speaking to the press altogether. They keep asking who killed my daughter, she once whispered to a reporter. But she wasn't just a murder case. She was Louisa. Her grief consumed. The house was sold. Louisa's belongings were boxed and stored by distant relatives. Every December, a small candlelight vigil was held in her memory near the old house. But as years passed, her name faded from headlines. Then from conversation. In the 1980s, as forensic science evolved, a few ambitious detectives revisited the case. A new forensic officer, Paula Rendell, re-examined the evidence files. She hoped to extract something new using fresh techniques, but the results were disappointing. Most of the physical evidence had degraded. The clothing was too fragile to reprocess. The palm print had faded with time. Nothing usable remained. The Louisa Dunne case was officially declared a cold case in 1989. Yet, within police circles, her file remained known, almost legendary for its silence, its sadness, its stillness. Then came the 2000s. With the emergence of DNA profiling and national databases, Avon and Somerset police quietly began reevaluating unsolved cases. Louisa's name resurfaced on a review list in 2005, but again, no match was found, and budget constraints forced the department to shelve many efforts. Years passed, few community journalists ran anniversary stories. One podcast episode in 2013 briefly explored Louisa's case, but didn't uncover anything new. For all intents and purposes, the mystery stayed buried. But that would change. The break wouldn't come until late 2023, when a new initiative launched in the department, Project Resolve, a focused reinvestigation of the region's 10 most compelling cold cases. One of the newly assigned officers, DS Eleanor Hayes, pulled Louisa's file. Hayes was young but meticulous. She was intrigued by how much detail had been preserved in the old reports, the clarity of evidence descriptions, the photographs, the notes by D. Morris. More importantly, she discovered that the original biological samples had been archived. In a separate forensic vault, and they were intact, unused, untested by modern technology. It was a goldmine. Hayes reached out to a private lab specializing in cold case evidence. In early January 2024, swabs from Louisa's preserved samples were delivered under police escort. The lab confirmed that trace DNA, though faint, was recoverable. It would take weeks to process and compare against national and international databases. But it was a start. Hayes worked long nights, reading through every testimony, photograph, and newspaper clipping. She created a digital timeline, plotted movements, and flagged anomalies. One anomaly stood out: the position of the cigarette butt. It lay almost deliberately placed, not dropped in haste. What if it wasn't an accident? What if it was a signature? As the lab work continued, Hayes expanded her investigation. She requested archived files on similar attacks from the 1960s in the region. She was looking for patterns, connections, names that had once been overlooked. Her team scoured records, and within 3 weeks a name resurfaced that hadn't been mentioned in the Dunne case before: Lan Headley, a local repairman who lived 2 streets over from Louisa at the time. No criminal record then, but an anonymous complaint in 1969 about strange behavior around women in the neighborhood. It had never been followed up, but that moment, the confrontation, the unraveling of decades, that's for part 2. In this opening chapter, we've met Louisa Dunne, a quiet girl in a quiet town whose life ended violently and inexplicably. One cold November night in 1967, her case would become one of the UK's oldest unsolved murders. But after nearly 6 decades, justice would finally stir in the shadows. The year was 2024. And nearly 57 years had passed since the brutal murder of Louisa Dunne, a young woman whose gentle presence once graced the quiet terraces of Easton, Bristol. The case, long considered unsolvable, had been reactivated under Project Resolve, a special task force focused on reopening Britain's coldest cases. Detective Sergeant Eleanor Hayes, known for her meticulous attention to detail, had taken a special interest in Louisa's file. Tucked within brittle folders and fading black and white photographs were sealed evidence bags, remnants of Louisa's clothing. including her blue skirt, white blouse, and her iconic black shawl items that had remained untouched since 1967. Also preserved was a single cigarette but found near her body. These samples were sent to a state-of-the-art lab in Manchester known for working miracles on degraded DNA. Hayes watched the process with tireless focus, knowing that modern forensics might do what 1960s policing could not. On February 15, 2024, she received the call that would change everything: partial DNA. Profile retrieved from the old biological evidence had matched a sample recently added to the National DNA Database. The name, Ryland Headley. The 92-year-old had lived just 2 streets away from Louisa in 1967, but had never been questioned or even listed as a suspect. No criminal record, no interviews. He was, back then, invisible to the system. Now, living in a modest care facility in Somerset, he had unknowingly provided a DNA sample during a recent medical exam. Hayes and her team pulled his employment records and learned he had worked as a chimney sweep and handyman, a job that gave him access to homes across Bristol, including properties with sash windows like the one found open in Louisa's flat. When Hayes visited the care home, she found a frail man with deep-set eyes and a distant stare, wearing a gray cardigan and black trousers. She gently asked, "Do you remember Louisa Dunne?" After a long silence, he muttered, "She was quiet." When told about the DNA match, Ryland grew visibly pale. After some time in water, he said quietly, "It wasn't supposed to happen. I just wanted to talk to her, though not a legal confession." The words hung heavy in the air. A second DNA sample was collected and sent to the lab. The results confirmed the match. Further digging into his history revealed a chilling pattern. Ryland had abruptly left Bristol just months after the murder and had bounced from job to job, keeping to himself. An old 1969 report mentioned a man matching his description being seen peering through women's windows, but it had never been followed up. The system had missed him. With undeniable evidence in hand, Hayes coordinated with the Crown Prosecution Service. On March 10, 2024, Ryland Headley was officially charged with the rape and murder of Louisa Dunne, making this the oldest solved cold case in UK history. Media outlets exploded with the headline. Surviving family members, including a niece who had only known Louisa through faded photos, shared their relief. "She was a ghost in our family, but now she can rest." In court, Ryland appeared in a wheelchair, looking fragile and small. Yet when asked for his plea, he said, "Guilty." The courtroom held its breath. The judge, acknowledging his advanced age, delivered a stern statement. "You stole a life, and you stole decades of peace. Your age does not absolve your actions." Ryland Headley was sentenced to life in prison, which, given his condition, meant he would likely die behind bars. Outside the courthouse, D.S. Hayes spoke to the press with measured grace. "Some cases go quiet, but they're never truly closed. Justice may take time, but it does not forget." And so, after more than half a century, the name Louisa Dunne was no longer attached to mystery. It was attached to justice. After the courtroom delivered its historic verdict, naming Ryland Headley as the murderer of Louisa Dunne, the headlines exploded across the UK. Yet for D.S. Eleanor Hayes, the real work had only just begun. Closure in a legal sense didn't mean the truth was fully known, as the media hailed it as the longest cold case ever solved in British history. Hayes sat quietly in her office reviewing the evidence, not to question the outcome, but because of one lingering feeling: that Louisa wasn't the only victim. 2 days after the sentencing, an anonymous envelope landed on Hayes's desk. No return address. Inside was a single slip of paper with rough, cursive handwriting. Louisa wasn't the first. Look near Greenbank 1965. Her name was Elsie. The note was unsigned, but it shook Hayes to her core. She dug into the archives, ordering files from 1965 to be pulled. Among the yellowed papers and cracked leather folders, she found a Telsey Branner, age 19, strangled behind a bakery in Greenbank. Her body had been found in an alley, blouse torn, handbag missing, and a cigarette butt nearby. The crime had never been solved, written off as a random mugging. But Hayes saw the parallels instantly: the lack of signs of forced entry, the location, the age of the victim, and most hauntingly, the note. She ordered the evidence to be re-examined. To her relief, someone in 1965 had preserved fingernail scrapings in sealed envelopes. Samples were fragile but intact. She sent them to forensics, hoping technology could pull something new. As the lab worked, Hayes visited Greenbank. The bakery was now a second-hand bookstore, but the alley was the same. Standing there, she imagined what Elsie had seen in her final moments. An open window? A shadow in the dark? 2 weeks later, DNA results confirmed to match Ryland Headley. His profile matched what had been recovered from under Elsie's nails. Hayes was both vindicated and horrified. Louisa was not his first victim. Armed with this evidence, she contacted the Crown Prosecution Service. But in a cruel twist of timing, Ryland Headley had died in prison just 48 hours earlier from pneumonia. Officially, he would never be tried for Elsie Branner's murder, yet the truth was now undeniable. Hayes held a press conference. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters asked if other victims were likely. "I believe there could be more," she replied honestly. "We are reopening cold cases from that era. This is no longer about just one woman. It's about who else might have suffered in silence." The news exploded. Families with unsolved cases began reaching out. Among them was Margaret Felton's sister. Margaret had gone missing in 1966 after posting a classified ad for handyman work. Ryland had worked in her area that same month, and came Deborah Marks, a schoolteacher last. Seen walking home in 1964, her satchel was found near the railway. Again, Ryland's chimney sweep records placed him nearby. A pattern began forming a grim timeline stretching back a decade. Hayes worked around the clock, building a geographic profile. She pinpointed job sites, victims' locations, and unsolved case files. A haunting web emerged. Ryland had stayed invisible by moving town to town, always working in manual jobs, never drawing attention. He preyed on women who lived alone, often entering through windows or posing as a repairman. The forensics unit was overwhelmed, but determined. They tested scraps of evidence from 1963 to 1971, finding degraded but usable DNA in 2 more cases both. Matched Ryland. Meanwhile, Hayes dug deeper into his life. With permission, she examined his prison belongings. Old letters, tattered journals, receipts. One journal entry from 1989 read, "I remember the blue. Remember the sound when they stopped moving." The shawl always slipped off. Chillingly poetic, his writings painted a portrait of a man haunted but unrepentant. In one note, he mentioned the girl who saw too much and windows that don't scream. Hayes suspected that Ryland viewed his crimes as trophies, moments, captured in stillness, not violence. She interviewed former neighbors and coworkers. Most said the same thing. Quiet man, never married, polite, always alone. But one woman, his former landlord's daughter, recalled finding women's earrings hidden in the attic after he moved out. Police never investigated. That attic had been cleaned out years ago, the contents long gone. The missed opportunities. Stung Hayes compiled a formal report linking Ryland to at least 5 unsolved murders. She presented it to the chief commissioner, recommending a new historical crimes unit dedicated to revisiting long-cold cases. Her proposal was approved. The Louisa Dunne, unit named in memory of the woman whose case started, it all was formed under Avon and Somerset Police. Hayes was named its inaugural lead investigator. Meanwhile, the public grew more engaged. True crime podcasts documented every twist. BBC commissioned a documentary titled Through Her Window, The Louisa Dunne Story. Hayes agreed to one. Interview, saying simply, "If we had stopped him in 1965, Louisa might still be alive. That's why this work matters." She visited Louisa's grave that evening. The black shawl Louisa wore that night had been returned to her family after the trial. Her niece left it folded neatly on the headstone. Hayes stood there in silence, her thoughts racing. Justice had come late, but it had come. Ryland Headley was now confirmed as a serial predator who evaded detection for over a decade. Though he died before facing full accountability, history would remember his name not as a forgotten footnote, but as a warning. Predators thrive in silence. His journals were submitted to psychological experts, some of whom diagnosed him posthumously with antisocial personality disorder and trauma-driven detachment. Others argued he had shown patterns of deliberate concealment and manipulation, hallmarks of a functioning sociopath. The debate wasn't whether he was disturbed, but how he had gone undetected. Hayes continued to work through his timeline. She launched a public appeal asking for any families of women who had gone missing between 1960 and 1975 to contact her team. Hundreds of leads came in. Many were ruled out, but 5 new cases were flagged as possible Ryland victims. Among them, Catherine Doyle, 1967, disappeared walking home from a factory shift. And Marion Clark, last seen boarding a train Ryland was confirmed to have taken. Hayes added both names to her report. She knew the answers might never come, but every step forward mattered. In the end, Part 3 of the Louisa Dunne case wasn't just about confirming Ryland's past crimes. It was about exposing the system that allowed him to go unnoticed. It was about preventing the next Louisa, Elsie, Catherine, or Deborah. Hayes looked out her office window late one night, the city lights twinkling. Her phone buzzed with another cold case tip. She took a breath and answered, because the silence was over and she wasn't done listening. Months had passed since the Louisa Dunne cold case unit had been established, and DS Eleanor Hayes was now at the helm of one of the most active historical investigations in UK policing history. Yet even with the victories of confirming 5 prior victims of Ryland Headley and bringing long overdue justice to their families, Hayes knew the depth of his crimes had not yet been fully unearthed. The team worked tirelessly, pouring through faded case files, yellowed autopsy reports, and forgotten evidence bags from across the country. One late afternoon in September, as Hayes stood before a corkboard dotted with pins and threads connecting victims to locations, a junior analyst named Peter Langley approached her with a newly flagged case from 1970. Joanne Miller, age 24, reported missing in Manchester. The file had been marked closed, presumed runaway. But the case notes revealed an eerie familiarity. Joanne had called for a chimney sweep the day before she vanished, and Ryland Headley had been working on contract in the area that month. The coincidence was too strong to ignore. Hayes ordered the file reopened. Joanne's landlord at the time, now in his late 80s, was located in a care home outside Salford. When interviewed, he barely remembered much, except one thing: a polite, soft-spoken man named Ryland, who showed up twice in the same week to check the flu. Joanne was last seen the next morning. Hayes added Joanne to the working list of possible Headley victims and began coordinating with Greater Manchester Police for more records. But the true breakthrough came from an unexpected place: a letter, handwritten and mailed directly to the station. It was from a woman named Beryl Maddox, now 75, living in Yorkshire. She claimed she had survived an attack in 1971 that she'd never reported. Hayes arranged to meet her in person. The interview took place at Beryl's small cottage, warm with the scent of lavender and old books. Beryl sat across from Hayes, trembling slightly as she recounted the night. She had been working late in a sewing factory and took a shortcut home through the alley behind a post office. A man had followed her silently, then struck from behind. She fought back, scratched his face, and he ran off. She never saw his face clearly, but what she remembered haunted her: the strong smell of coal dust, a faint limp, and a soft whisper just before he vanished. "Oh, don't scream through the window." Hayes showed her archival photos of Ryland. Headley and Beryl gasped, pointing immediately at a 1970 passport photo. "That's him," she whispered. His face was thinner back then, but the eyes, I'd never forget those. Her account gave Hayes something new: confirmation that Ryland had likely attacked more women who had never been found, or whose cases were never linked. But even more importantly, Beryl mentioned something no file had captured before. The attacker dropped a black leather glove during the struggle and picked it up before running off, muttering, "Always take it back." Hayes leaned in. "What do you mean?" Beryl clarified. It sounded like a rule, like he never left anything behind. The idea struck Hayes like lightning. Ryland wasn't just hiding himself, he was keeping trophies. That changed everything. If Ryland kept souvenirs, physical evidence could still exist hidden somewhere. She ordered a full property audit, requesting records of every address Ryland Headley had lived in, rented, or worked on between 1960 and 1980. After 2 weeks, one site stood out: a now-abandoned farmhouse in rural Somerset, which Ryland had, leased under a fake surname for 6 months in 1972. No one had lived there since. 1983, Hayes and a forensic search team visited the property. Dust covered every surface. Floorboards were warped from time and moisture. Rodents had made nests in the walls. But in the bedroom closet, the team found something unusual: a small area of floor that sounded hollow when tapped, carefully prying. The boards up, they revealed a shallow, hand-dug compartment beneath the floor. Inside were 4 rusted biscuit tins wrapped in oilcloth. When opened, each revealed small, heartbreaking artifacts: a pair of beaded earrings, a hairbrush with initials KM, a silk scarf, and a broken brooch engraved with "To My Darling D." Hayes stood silently as the items were catalogued. One by one, the objects were laid out on evidence tables.
Ow!
Some bore traces of dried blood. Others had strands of hair still embedded. For Hayes, it was a museum of stolen lives. She made it her personal mission to identify each item, and through them each victim. A forensic genealogy expert was brought in, and public appeals were launched, showcasing the artifacts in hopes families might recognize them. The brooch led to a match. First, it belonged to Deborah Marks, schoolteacher from 1964. The hairbrush was linked to Catherine Doyle through a family photo from her niece. Slowly, the remaining items began to tell their stories. More names, more dates, more gaps in the justice system. The media erupted once more, dubbing Ryland Headley the silent collector. Hayes hated the name, but understood its power. She remained focused. The press interviewed her briefly at a news conference, asking if she believed there were more caches of evidence. "Yes," she answered plainly, "and we will find them." Hayes led searches of 2 more properties and found no further stashes. But one attic contained old wallpaper rolls with handwritten notes between the layers' names, dates, and cryptic phrases like "black hair," "winter smile," and "corner shop," "Sunday late." Whether these were coded references or delusions, Hayes couldn't say. But each clue was added to the growing psychological profile being built by consultants. Ryland had clearly been methodical, ritualistic, selected victims with care, returned to scenes days later, and always took something. Some experts called it compulsive memorialization. Others called it predatory control. Hayes called it horror. Every night she returned to the station, sat at her desk, still wearing her dark navy pantsuit and light blue blouse, and reviewed the day's findings. Her team had expanded to 14 officers, including victim liaison officers and trauma counselors, as more families came forward. Some brought old photos, others kept hope that missing persons could finally be confirmed. One woman, in tears, recognized a ribbon in a recovered box as the one her sister had worn on her final birthday before vanishing. Hayes gave her a moment. Placing a hand gently on hers, "She matters. And she's not forgotten." Outside the station, people left flowers by a newly erected plaque listing Louisa, Elsie, Deborah, Catherine, and others now confirmed. Yet Hayes knew the work wasn't done. She stared at the names, still tagged pending ID. They were more than evidence. They were daughters, sisters, lives cut short by a man who had hidden in plain sight for decades. Case wasn't about the court or the killer anymore. It was about memory, accountability, and the long road toward restoring identity to the voiceless. Hayes stepped into the autumn air that night, the cold biting but the resolve in her chest burning stronger than ever. There were still names to find, still stories to restore, and as long as she wore the Bajande, the navy suit she now considered a kind of armor, she would keep going. For Louisa. For all of them. 1 month had passed since the discovery of the farmhouse cache, and the Louisa Dunne cold case unit had entered a strange new phase, no longer chasing shadows, but cataloging the voices of the past with quiet, deliberate care. D.S. Eleanor Hayes, still clad in her trademark dark navy pantsuit and light blue blouse, spent her days juggling forensic updates, press inquiries, and meetings with grieving families whose decades-long questions were finally being answered. Just as the team began to believe they were nearing the end of Ryland Headley's horrifying legacy, a plain cardboard box was delivered anonymously to a small community center in Devon. Inside, a police officer found a sealed envelope marked for Hayes, along with a series of carefully wrapped personal items, a silver locket, a stained handkerchief embroidered with the initials M, a dated Polaroid of a wooded clearing, and, most chilling of all, a crudely drawn map, marked. With a red X taped to the bottom of the box was a note written in jagged, trembling handwriting. "You missed one." Hayes, who had just finished a debrief with forensic analysts, was summoned immediately. She recognized the script instantly. It matched the writing found in Ryland Headley's hidden notebooks. DNA swabs taken from the locket confirmed it belonged to Evelyn Moss, a woman reported missing in 1965 who had never been linked to Ryland before. The location on the map, a patch of private woodland on an old estate near Exmoor, matched a site Ryland had briefly worked on as a groundskeeper decades earlier. With a search warrant and landowner permission, Hayes led a small, specialized dig team into the forest. Under 6 feet of soil, they unearthed the remains of a young woman buried in a shallow grave wrapped in a rotting tarpaulin, along with pieces of clothing that matched what Evelyn had last been seen wearing. There was no doubt, Ryland had claimed. Another life, and somehow, even in his old age, he had ensured her discovery would be part of his final performance. Back at the station, Hayes wrestled with the implications. Had Ryland mailed the box himself before his arrest? Or had someone else, an accomplice, a sympathizer, been helping him? Thought was nauseating. The box's contents had no fingerprints, and the postmark was blurred by rain. A possibility more disturbing than any she'd faced before now emerged. Ryland had planned this. A final game, a final clue. One last taunt to prove his control stretched beyond capture. She visited Ryland in prison one last time, not out of curiosity, but to look him in the eyes. The man who sat in the wheelchair, blanketed and silent, was 92, frail, hooked to oxygen. He didn't speak. When shown the photo of Evelyn Moss and asked if he recognized her, he gave no response. But Hayes saw the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, a smile, perhaps, or the shadow of one. It was enough. There would be no confession, no clean closure, just the truth. That he had remembered Evelyn for 60 years and waited for the right moment to reveal her. The following week, Ryland Headley was officially charged with Evelyn Moss's murder among the others. Though too infirm to stand trial in the traditional sense, his conviction remained a national moment. Reporters called him Britain's most patient killer, a title Hayes loathed but couldn't dispute. His sentencing took place with him present by video link, slumped and silent, while families of victims finally stood to speak names into the record. Hayes watched quietly as each sister, mother, and daughter stood strong, giving voices to the silenced. In her public statement outside the courtroom, Hayes made no mention of Ryland by name. "This is not his story," she said into a sea of microphones. "It's theirs. And we will continue to speak their names until the world knows them better than his." The next morning, she took a train to the north and visited her father's grave for the first time in over a year. A quiet, fog-laced cemetery in Yorkshire, where the grass was slightly overgrown and the autumn leaves gathered in waves around the stones. She stood before the headstone, hands in the pockets of her coat, remembering his voice. Justice takes time, but it never forgets. The journey she'd taken, the obsession that had gripped her since childhood, had come full circle. Her father had investigated Louisa Dunne in 1967 and failed to find her killer. But now, in 2025, his daughter had succeeded, not just for Louisa, but for so many others. She knelt down, placing a small bouquet and the official police badge of the now disbanded cold case unit. A quiet tribute to a legacy fulfilled. As she stood and turned to leave, the wind picked up gently. Behind her, the headstone remained as it always had, but the weight on her shoulders felt just a bit lighter. Walking back through the winding cemetery path, her phone buzzed. A new missing persons report. A new name. A new file. She didn't hesitate. The past was not done with her. She wasn't done with it.